Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to P5, Project 5, Painting. It's more of a digital illustration. This is a finished product here that I did a couple years ago. This is a finished product that a student did a couple years ago. And here's the last couple ones that I did. This is one of a covered bridge. We worked on this photo in Computer Graphics 1, the photograph of it. This is one I did last year that was actually a photograph taken in the Lehigh Parkway in Allentown. And it actually incorporates the same fisherman that was from the original illustration, just to add kind of a focal point to it. And you could see the finished product in Photoshop involves using some brush strokes down here. I used a custom brush to kind of make grass. I used filters down here. I took a shot of the bridge and everything and made a reflection in the water, and then kind of turned down the opacity and warped it a little bit to make it look like water. All these different parts of this area have different textures on. There's even some brushing that I did in Illustrator, where I actually used the brush tool in Illustrator and just kind of hand drew some branches on the trees instead of trying to trace them all. And in some case I used the pen tool, I used rectangles, and the idea is that all these different elements, or most of them, are in different layers, so they can kind of overlap and have texture and have shadow and kind of build up into this kind of almost a 3D looking illustration. The original intent of this project was to kind of take the effect of like Blue's Clues and Little Bill, if you've ever seen those animations from the early 2000s where they have that kind of paper cutout kind of look. And I always thought that was kind of a neat look, and we tried to kind of transfer that into Photoshop, but it's kind of evolved a little bit. And let me show you the beginning parts of this. Here's the beginning illustration of the one of the bridge, where it's basically a vector illustration. And what we do is we basically start with a photo like this, and then just start building with some background areas. Even if I turn all these off, I'll kind of show you how this started. This kind of starts with the biggest areas from the bottom, like the sky. And I'll have to turn this off. Here's the sky. Here's the grass. Here's the sidewall. Here's some bushes in here. And some of these, I didn't layer every single one here, but I mean, I didn't give it a name. Everyone should really have a name. I used kind of mid-tone. I used darks. I used lights with the trees. You can see as I build up here, I just kind of simplified the original photo by tracing over it and built kind of the inside of the bridge with just kind of simple vector shapes, built the outside of the bridge, different parts of this as I went. Everything's on different layers. The top of the bridge, everything that would need a separate shadow, a separate texture. And as I keep going here, you can see this one was detailed. There's the side of the bridge. There's the side of the roof. So as I go up here and add parts of this, you can see how I kind of built this up. And I was basically just tracing over that like we did with our vector portrait in Computer Graphics 1. Even the digital illustration came out fairly nice. But the idea of this is we're going to export this. We're going to go File, Export, and take all these layers, and we're going to export it as a Photoshop file, which we can do. We can actually export it as a Photoshop file. When we do that, it's going to ask me to replace something right now. But what we can do is we can give it a particular resolution, which I think we go to Other, and we do it like 240. We can also make sure that we write layers, which is important. And that will allow us to put all different effects on all different layers. And they could be layer styles, they could be textures, they could be shadows. We use renders, we use all kinds of filters when we get to Photoshop. So basically, we have a flat version here. I'll cancel out of this, which is just flat colors. And even these colors can be changed. So nothing is written in stone here. We can, as long as they're on different layers, it's very easy to colorize a layer or change the opacity, anything like that. I'll just show you this one. Here's the original painting. This woman started with the original painting and then kind of did a vector illustration over that of just kind of all the important parts. And even there's some parts that aren't included here that we do in Photoshop. If I go back to Photoshop and look at this one, you can see there's shadows and textures and this sky texture that's done in the background. That's all done in Photoshop. Okay, same thing with, I'll look at another one here. This was the first time I did this. I started with this kind of painting. That fish wasn't there. I put that in after the fact. But what actually happened here is I just kind of simplified these trees in the background almost abstractly. I did a sketch, or I kind of traced over the fisherman as best I could, very angular, just with the pen tool. just some background rocks here, and I just gave him basic colors. I didn't even do the water here, because what I ended up doing with the water is just kind of making this is the one that I did here. You can see what I did. I ended up doing like a copy merged and pasting it and kind of slipping it behind, and then actually having a reflection which I kind of flip over and then apply filters. So that's what I ended up doing here. To look at another one in Illustrator, this is the bridge one I mentioned. Here's the one I did last year. This started as kind of a metal bridge, and what I did here, again, I left the water open because I knew I'd want to do a reflection in Photoshop. I did rocks, I did trees. Each separate thing here is a separate, part. Anything that's going to have a different texture is going to have a different layer. So I did the bridge on a separate layer. I did the little bank here on a separate layer. I just did some of the areas in the back. I just filled in with real simple shapes that are going to be the trees that are going to have textures. Then when I go to Photoshop, on this one, you can see what I did here. I just I didn't add textures to the actual trees that I did with the brushes, but the ones in the back have textures. Here's a separate texture on this area, separate texture on this area, some shadows, bevel and emboss on the bridge parts. I even brought the fisherman back in, gave him a little texture. The water does not have a texture. That's just something where I did a copy merged and pasted it kind of behind things and ran a filter on it. And then some of this grass stuff I just drew. I just used a brush tool and went in here and just got a custom brush. There's sponge brushes, there's kind of these, I think it was this one here, this kind of weed brush that I've kind of mixed up out of a couple colors and worked with that. And it's kind of a fun project to work on. As far as shadows and things like that, I just drew shapes in Illustrator, and then I turned the opacity down and I made them shadows. Just some rocks that I put in here, I put drop shadows on those. And you could certainly add more things once you get to Photoshop, so it doesn't have to be perfect in Illustrator. But that's basically the process of this. We're going to start in Illustrator. We're going to start with a photograph or a painting, just something that basically fits on an 8.5 by 11 page with maybe a 1/2 inch or more of margin on it. And then you're going to work kind of with very basic shapes like sky and ground, and then work to very detailed shapes, keeping as much as you can on separate layers, so that all those separate layers, when you get to Photoshop, you'll be able to put different textures, different drop shadows, lighting effects, cloud effects, all kinds of different things we kind of experiment with in here. And it's a nice opportunity, because normally in Photoshop we don't have an opportunity to work with all these textures and effects and filters, but it's a nice opportunity to do kind of a fine art project, to be a little creative. It'd be nice if you could use something of yours, maybe a photograph or some artwork of yours, so that it's all yours. If you use it in a portfolio, it'll be your photograph, your digital illustration, and your kind of effects that you put together in Photoshop, and it comes out as a nice portfolio piece, particularly on screen. So that's kind of the overview. I'll do another movie where I'll just go over, just maybe starting a new one and just going over some of the basic steps, but this will be something that you'll be able to work on your own and kind of, do some exploration with.